So I'm sure you all have heard the news. Teen Spirit is up for pre-order. Let's crack it open and take a look.
If you're a fan of the channel, consider supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help me continue to bring you premier Unmatched content. Unlock exclusive rewards by becoming a patron today.
What's up guys, Zero Skater here, and we are back for another unboxing video. As you may have heard, the new Teen Spirit Marvel set has gone up for pre-order on the Restoration Games website, so there will be a link in the description below that you can go and pre-order your own copy. And if you do so, you are going to get a free pack of foil cards. I believe it's one for each of the 3 new fighters in the set. So that is super awesome, and make sure you click the link and get your set ordered. But I just got back from the Gamers Ranch, which is a really cool board game kind of Airbnb type place, vacation home in Missouri. And it was organized by Chad, and a bunch of us from the Unmatched Discord met up, and we played a whole weekend of board games, and it was just an absolute blast. So shout out to everybody who was there. I had a great time with you all. And if you can see here, this little Malcolm mini here, this was actually a prize won by my girlfriend Harley, who got second place in our little Unmatched tournament that we hosted there. So I'm very proud of her for that, you know, keeping up with the champion household, so to speak. So that's really cool. Chocolate Rain actually ended up winning that one, and he got a sweet jackalope print by Oliver Barrett. So the prizes were very graciously given out by Lucio, so thank you to Lucio for that. And but it was just a weekend full of Unmatched and all kinds of board game fun, so it was a blast. But enough about that. You guys are here for the unboxing of the new Teen Spirit set. So we are going to be cracking this open on camera today, and I did get a chance to play some of it over that weekend at the Gamers Ranch. So I have some thoughts already on how I think the fighters are going to shake up, but I know Chad also had posted a video earlier about his thoughts on how the characters might affect the meta, so go check out that video if you haven't already. If you're up to date with all the happenings in the new Unmatched news, I bet you've already seen it, but, you know, gotta shout that one out. And let's get into it. But as always, guys, be sure to attack that like button if you enjoy the video, and subscribe for more Unmatched content. And let's not wait any longer. We are going to crack open Teen Spirit. Alright, so here we go with the box opening. Going to open up the Teen Spirit. Let me get this plastic off, and then I'll show off the box, and then we'll open it up and see what's all inside. Alright, so let's take a look at the back. And so we see in this set it's going to be Miss Marvel, Squirrel Girl, Cloak and Dagger. So some pretty unique characters, that's for sure. Some, I would say, lesser known Marvel characters. Some of you guys out there might be familiar from comics and whatnot, but I'm not a comic book guy, so I only know pretty much what I see from Marvel movies. But take a look at the side panels here. That's a cool Squirrel Girl one. Here's one for Miss Marvel. And then if we look at the bottom, there we got Dagger. And then at the top we got Cloak. I think Cloak is the coolest one. His art is super cool in the set. I think Miss Marvel and Squirrel Girl, the art is pretty cartoony, but the Cloak and Dagger art is pretty dark and cool in my opinion. So let's open this up here. Got a cool little pamphlet about the other 2 Marvel sets, and here's a checklist on the back with all the Marvel heroes that, you know, we care about here. We can see currently. And then we got the rule book, Teen Spirit rules. Let's flip through this real quick. We got some Miss Marvel art there. There's a squirrel talking about all the basic rules that we already know and love. Let's see if there's anything interesting. So there are a couple things in this set, and what you need to know basically is that Cloak and Dagger are dual heroes, much like the Raptors. So if one dies, you still keep playing the game. You don't lose yet. And then the squirrels are small fighters. Now, small fighters are a new type of fighter in the game. Like we saw large with the T-Rex, now we see small. And essentially, they can share spaces with other fighters and tokens. And you can move through the small fighters and they can move through you. But they can still attack, and you can actually stack up multiples on the same space. In the case of squirrels, up to 4 of them. And if they take damage, every squirrel in that same space will die off. So if you stack them up, they're more susceptible to being cleared easily. But I think some of Squirrel Girl's card effects have something to do with multiple squirrels, so that's pretty neat. Interested to see what other kind of small fighters we'll see in the future. But then for free-for-all and team play, so there's the rules. Here are the health dials here. And then the new item tokens. So we'll get to those in just a little bit, but if you want to see the back of the punch board, you can see the item effects there. We'll talk about those when I get to the map, which we will take a look at right now. So really cool map. This is actually Navy Pier. So I am from the Chicago area, so it's cool to see a map themed off of a place I've actually been to. So I love the color too. It's very colorful. The blues, purples, and then you got the yellows and oranges, and then the greens. I just think it's a super nice looking map overall. And if you want to take a look at the other side with the rings, you can see a little bit more of the actual artwork in the background there. You got the Ferris wheel, and then just everything around it. There's a big building area, and then the grassy areas, and here's the walkway. So pretty cool. But we'll get to the item tokens. We'll do that right now. Why not? We're on the map, right? So the item tokens here, the schemes are the big ones, right? So we have Zazoom, which you look at the top 3 cards of any deck and put them back in any order. So interesting to note that that is a pass, which is great. And then it also lets you either get knowledge of what your opponent might be coming up to next if you are trying to be a little bit more offensive, I guess. Or if you're trying to play a more defensive, you can look at your own cards of your deck and make sure you have some defenses coming up or plan out your turn accordingly. I think it's a pretty neat effect. It's nothing insane, but it is a pass and it's pretty cool. The Slushy is the OP one here. I mean, recover 3 health and it's a pass. That's just ridiculous. So I'm a little bit concerned about that one, at least in competitive play, but it's pretty cool. Helium balloons, you move 2 spaces, gain an action. Nothing too crazy there. You have to like either move onto that space and then use it to get even further without boosting, so it kind of saves you a boost in that regard, or you start on the space and then you can move across the map really quickly and easily. But again, it's nothing crazy. Then we have the snow globe, the garbage can lid, and the parking meter. So those are just the standard versatile items that give you buffs in combat to your cards. So +1, +1, +2. Nothing crazy there. So let's move on, and we will take a look at the minis first. So here is Miss Marvel. I want to make sure that I can get the camera to focus good here. Take a look. And there's always stuff on the bottom of the bases too of these Marvel minis, which was pointed out by Tater Tots. I was watching his stream there. But there's the Miss Marvel one. Then we have Squirrel Girl. This one is a really cool mini, actually. I like how it looks like she's jumping out of a tree. You can see the tree stump at the bottom there with the little squirrel. So that's a cool one. And then we have 2 different ones for Cloak and Dagger, right? So we'll take a look at Cloak first. So he is basically just a misty cloak. I think he's one of the coolest ones though, in my opinion. Again, just like the art, I like how it's like more dark and serious than the other ones, which are a lot more cartoony. But then we see Dagger here. Nothing real special about this one. Just kind of a basic human pose.
But there's the minis for you. And then we have, of course, the rivets for the health dials. We'll toss those to the side. And then we got to crack open these decks. Oh, actually, let's take a look at the squirrel tokens, right? So Squirrel Girl gets 8 squirrel tokens overall, which is kind of crazy. So here they are, and if you notice, one of these is not like the others, right? So we have this one token which has the little bow on it. And so I don't know anything about Squirrel Girl from the comics or anything, but I am told that this is Tippy Toe, which is, I guess, the squirrel that Squirrel Girl can talk to. And then the rest are just standard park squirrels or whatever. So you got the one special one. So when you're going up against Squirrel Girl in a competitive setting, what you have to do is you always have to focus on Tippy Toe first, and you have to kill Tippy Toe because that is the source of all the squirrel's power, obviously. So 8 squirrel tokens, that is pretty insane. And oh cool, they even fit in the box nice here. Always gotta love the organization of Unmatched sets. That's really nice. But we have all the decks here, so this is I think my favorite part. And we're gonna take a look at these, crack them open, and we will talk about each one. So I guess we'll go in order. We'll go Miss Marvel, then Squirrel Girl, then Cloak and Dagger. So let's get right into that. Okay, so starting with Miss Marvel, let's go ahead and crack this open. Now, I do think that these fighters are all very fun and very unique. I'm not sure how competitively viable they're going to be, but it's just going to take some testing, and I'm very interested to find out. But if we take a look at the Miss Marvel card back here, see, it's very fun and comical, I feel like. You see the fist kind of punching through the border of the card there, which is pretty neat. There's always those nice little touches that really make each card back special. But to me, this just seems like a bunch of, it reminds me of like Laffy Taffy or something, which I guess fits, you know, the Navy Pier and the Carnival type atmosphere there in the set. So Miss Marvel is a melee fighter, 14 starting health, move 2, and she is a solo fighter, so no sidekicks. But I think she has a lot of potential for a solo, because if we look at her ability, which is stretchy, at the start of your turn you may move Miss Marvel 1 space. So that's optional, 1 free movement, kind of like Bruce Lee, except this is at the start of the turn. And then Miss Marvel can attack up to 2 spaces away, ignoring zones. So this is the same attacking condition that the large fighters have, like the T-Rex. So being able to attack 2 spaces away is incredibly strong, because that means that you can attack a melee fighter and they have to move up to you first before they can attack you back. So they can't attack first action and then maneuver away. They have to approach you still. So kind of like being ranged in a way there, but also you're ignoring zones. So on certain map layouts, it could be even better than being ranged, because ranged obviously has to be in the zone, whereas this does not. So it can attack across zone cutoffs. So with that, you know, the free movement at the beginning of your turn and the attacking up to 2 spaces away, that means that if your opponent is a melee fighter and they are adjacent to you and they attack, and if they're a move 2, they move away 2 spaces, and you can do your little hop at the start, and then you can attack them first action without even having to maneuver, which is pretty insane. You're also a move 2, so even if they were a move 3 or if they boost or whatever, you should have no problem catching up to your opponent to make attacks. So I think Miss Marvel is just going to be very versatile. But let's take a look at the cards in the deck. So first one we're going to see is Big Windup. Now this is probably one of the best cards in the deck, because it's a red 4 that says during combat, if Miss Marvel shares no zones with the opposing fighter, you may boost this card. So that's where the ability comes into play, and the map, right? Because on certain maps this might be really hard to actually be able to trigger, and that might be crucial to her gameplay. So we're going to have to see how much that actually impacts, but I think on most maps you can probably find spots where you can actually trigger this. And a 4 value, essentially second shot, is crazy strong, right? Medusa's second shot is a 3, and Muldoon's is only a 2, but this is a 4. So even if this were to get fainted, you're still dealing 2 damage to the opponent, which you should feel great about, right? And you don't even have to waste an extra card to boost. And if they play something like a skirmish, you know, your standard good 4 value defense, well, as long as this can trigger, you can boost up and get true damage over the top of that skirmish with whatever the boost value is you're discarding. And as we will see, there is a 4 value boost in this deck, so really, really good card here. I think this is really what makes her a strong fighter. So there's 3 copies of that. You'll love to see it. Now the next card is called Easy Peasy. So this card says after combat, draw a card, then if you have 4 or more cards in your hand, deal a damage to an adjacent fighter. So it's incentivizing you to keep your hand count up, right? Because otherwise you miss out on that auto damage. And it's kind of like a Wily fighting in a way, but it does have the automatic card draw. So it's almost like a Snark and a Wily mixed together. Now, it's not AoE, right? It's not area of effect damage. It doesn't deal damage to every adjacent fighter, just one adjacent fighter. But any auto damage is still nice, and at a 3 value versatile, you know, with card draw tacked on, nothing to complain about there. So, pretty solid card. Next one is Embiggen. Now, this is probably my favorite card in the deck, because it says during combat, if Miss Marvel is in more zones than the opposing fighter, the value of this card is 6 instead. So wow, what a strong card this is. It's kind of like a momentous shift in a way, but it bumps to a 6 instead of a 5. And it has a different trigger condition of being in more zones, so yet again, it's going to be very map dependent on how often you can get this to trigger. But I think on most maps, there's a couple of tri-zone spaces or some dual zone spaces. And if you want to play this on defense, you just have Miss Marvel back off and stand on one of those spaces that has less zones all surrounding it. And you can always guarantee that you have a 6 value defense when you need it. So on certain maps, this is incredibly good on defense, and even on offense, your opponent might not be able to play around it at all times, right? Or they might have to make bad plays, or suboptimal, I should say, in order to play around this card becoming a 6. And so in that case, even if this isn't triggering often as a 6 value attack, even the effect that it has just existing in the deck could help you out a lot in a matchup. So with a 3 boost as well, right? So if you're boosting the big windup, boosting that up to a 7 with this 3 value boost, that's just really good. So there's 3 copies of this card in the deck. I love it so much. I think it's going to be a really, really good tool in a lot of situations. Next card we're going to see is her Feint. She has the standard 3 copies of Feint in the deck. You know, 2 value versatile, cancel all effects on your opponent's card. We all know Feint by now. It's always cool to see the different types of artwork on the different Feints too, because it always has that same kind of Feint style. You know, it's an iconic art style there, or pose I should say, but cool to see all the different versions. And then we see Fangirl, so 3 copies of this one, 0 value attack, but during combat the value of this card is equal to the number of cards in your hand. So we've seen something similar with the Dr. Sattler card, which is a versatile, and in this case it's not a versatile, it's only an attack, which makes it a little bit worse, but it's still a pretty strong card because it's something your opponent wants to feint, and if they don't feint it, it could get upwards of, you know, let's say you start your turn with 7 cards in hand, you maneuver up to 8, you attack with this, so you're down to 7 others in hand. It could be a 7 value attack, which is incredibly strong if your opponent doesn't feint it. You got to keep a large hand count, but you're already incentivized to do so with something like Easy Peasy so that you get that auto damage. So I don't think it'll be too difficult, but we'll have to see. I think if the opponent rushes you down, I'm not sure how much card draw Miss Marvel has, but I do know she has a little bit of it. So I think this card is very strong potentially. It's just going to depend on the game state. But here we see Friends and Family, so this is a one-of scheme. Now I love to see these one-of schemes with really high boost values because it means that even if the scheme doesn't come in handy at that time, the boost value often does, because 4 value boost is huge for movement, and it's also huge if you have any attacks in your deck that you can boost during combat. And one-of schemes, as long as they're not like linchpins of the deck, kind of like Lady of the Lake with King Arthur, as long as it's not a case like that, then even if you don't happen to see it in a game, it's not the worst thing in the world, but when you do see it, it's like a really cool opportunity, right? So this one says draw 2 cards, then you may spend an additional action to draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. So you could go from 1 card in hand and then spend your whole turn and go right back up to 7. which is just insane, right? That's like the most ridiculous card draw we've ever seen, even more so than Genie's 3 wishes to draw 5. So I don't know how useful that would actually be. It's probably a super niche case scenario that you'd even ever want to do that, because it does take up your whole turn just to draw up, and then you have the initiative put on you, and so once you draw up to 7, your opponent's just going to run away, and then on your following turn you're going to have to do a maneuver up to 8 and boost, probably, to be able to reach them, because nobody's going to approach you into a 7 card hand, most likely, unless they have 7 themselves. But why would they be at 7 and you're down to like 1 or 2 when you activate this, right? So I don't know, it's going to be very niche, but a 4 value boost is insane for the big windup, boosting up to an 8 value attack. And in, you know, very maybe against T-Rex or something, if you're desperate for cards, this could come in handy. So really cool card there. Next one up, we're going to see another scheme, 2 copies, called Euro and Fries. So you recover 2 health, then if you have 4 or more cards in your hand, gain an action. Now this card I think is a lot more interesting than it might seem on paper, because it seems like a simple heal 2, right? But it could be a pass if you have less than 4 cards in hand. But that's an interesting way to go about passes, right? Because a lot of times with passes, you and your opponent are both sitting at 7 cards, and let's say you have the initiative, right? So you have to maneuver up to 8. Now, if you have a pass, you can just play the pass and you'll be at 7 again, and now your opponent has the initiative. Otherwise, if you don't have any passes, when you're in that situation, you have to maneuver up to 8, and you probably have to boost to even reach your opponent. So now you're at 7 to 7 and you're making an attack, right? But you had to boost and your opponent didn't. So in that case, if you're talking about overall value in the deck, your opponent comes out ahead in that scenario. And that's why passes are so useful, because it lets you push the initiative back onto your opponent, and then they have to come approach you, most likely with a boost, which, again, it just gives you the advantage in the value game. But this card, if you have 7 cards in hand, it's not a pass, right? Because you're going to heal 2, but then you're going to gain an action. So it works a little bit differently than most passes, because you're oftentimes not passing when you have a really low hand count, such as this. In order for it to be a pass, you have to have 3 or less cards in hand. So that's like not the most opportune time to even play a pass. So it's just a really, really interesting card. I think it's going to be cool to see how players decide to use this. But recover 2 health, you can never be upset about that one, right? So with 14 starting health, 2 of these, that's kind of an effective 18 health solo fighter, which is pretty respectable. So let's move on to the next card. We're going to see I'm Not Touching You. So this is a 4 value attack. After combat, if Miss Marvel's space shares no zones with the opposing fighter, draw 2 cards. So it's got the same trigger condition as the big wind-up that we saw earlier. But this one will just draw you 2 cards. So again, that's really good for keeping up the tempo, right? Keeping your hand advantage, keeping up that pressure. And it will help trigger things like the Easy Peasy, which needs 4 or more cards in hand, or the Euro and Fries to gain an action if that's what you're wanting to do. And Miss Marvel so far seems like a tempo fighter to me, so I think a lot of times you're going to want to keep up that hand advantage, and in that case, this is a great card. And even if it's fainted, you won't get your card draw, but you're going to deal 2 damage to them. So 4 copies of this gives you some pretty reliable card draw, as long as you can get it to trigger based on the map and zone layout. Next card, we're going to see Momentous Shift, 3 copies of this. We've seen this before. During combat, if Miss Marvel started this turn in a different space, the value of this card is 5 instead. Now, this shift I think is a little bit more powerful than most. It's not quite as strong as Alice's, because Big Alice shift is a 7 and still 3 even if fainted. But the cool thing about this one is that you can use Miss Marvel's ability to move 1 space at the beginning of the turn, and that automatically will put your shift online. So you're able to, let's say they come up and attack you, they end adjacent. You use your ability, you hop back 1 space. Now because of your other part of your ability, you can still attack them. So you attack them with a shift first action, which is a really good attack, and then you maneuver 2 spaces back. So now you're 3 spaces away from the opponent, so if they are on move 2 and they want to come chase after you and attack you again, well, they have to maneuver and they have to boost, whereas you did not, and you still got to trigger your shift. A lot of times, shift is used as a second action attack, which will be the end of your turn, because you have to maneuver up first in order to get it buffed to a 5. So Shift in this deck is very, very strong. Next card, we're going to see Shrink, 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 so 2-value versatile. After combat, choose one effect. If Miss Marvel's space shares no zones with the opposing fighter, you get to do both. So you automatically get to pick either your opponent discards a card, or move the opposing fighter up to 3 spaces. So this is kind of like a pushback in a way from Misty Knight, the move opposing fighter up to 3, which can be good for, let's say they're camping on a certain item token that you want. You could attack and push them off of it and then move on to it yourself. You could also use it as defense, as a combo breaker if you're worried about attack chains like from Bruce Lee or the Raptors. Or you can use it as discard, right? As kind of like a pin the prey almost from the archers in Yananga's deck. So if you share no zones, you get to do both, which is great. So in that case, it almost is a pin the prey, right? It's just one less space of movement, but it's an extra value on the card. So with 3 copies in the deck, I think this is a great card for value if you want the discards, but if you need it for the combo breaker, you can do that as well. It's just got a lot of options, which I like. It's not the most strong card in the deck, only a 2 value, but if you're going to kind of equate this to the regroup of the deck, I think that's a pretty dang good regroup. And then the last card in the deck is Slingshot. So it's the only blue defense card we see. It says after combat, place Miss Marvel in any space in her zone. So it's sort of like the tactical retreat card from Bullseye, except you have to go within your zone, whereas Bullseye's goes outside of your zone. But again, it's a good combo breaker. A 3-value defense is just fine, you know, nothing crazy, but to combo break for a 3, it's pretty good. 3 copies in the deck makes it reliable that you'll see this pretty often, and it sets you up for an attack, first action, and then a maneuver away, like I said before, which then your opponent probably has to boost in order to catch up to you. So pretty good card overall. So she is nothing crazy in terms of what her card effects do, but I just think she's super solid because her ability is incredibly strong. I think it's very underrated. At first glance, you might not think it's too special, but it's very, very strong in practice. And I think that's going to probably make Miss Marvel the best fighter competitively in the box. And I could be proven wrong. The other fighters, I think, have maybe a higher ceiling, but they're going to be a lot more technical and difficult to execute. So whether or not that'll actually work out remains to be seen. But I think Miss Marvel there's nothing bad about her. She has healing. She has good movement with her ability. She's able to attack from far away, which is always really, really good. She's got super strong attacks. She's got feint punishes. She has card draw. It just seems like everything she needs in order to be a solid, viable fighter. So I think she's going to be much like Moon Knight in the case that she's versatile and can handle many different matchups. She might not be outstanding at any one particular aspect of the game, but overall, I think a great character. So that's Miss Marvel for you, and let's move on to the next. All right, so next up we have Squirrel Girl. So let's crack this one open. And as we saw before, Squirrel Girl is all about the squirrels, the new small fighters in the game. And her card effects are often based off of getting a lot of squirrels on the board for better effects to trigger. So taking a look at the card back here, I do really like how they snuck in the big tail of hers as an S, and the little squirrel here makes a G for SG, Squirrel Girl. So again, just those neat little touches that make these card backs unique. So Squirrel Girl is a 13 health melee fighter, move 2, and she has squirrels as her sidekicks, which are melee fighters, and you can have up to 8 of them. Her ability is called Go Nuts. At the start of your turn, you summon a squirrel in a space adjacent to Squirrel Girl. Squirrels are small fighters, and you do not start with any squirrels on the board. So it does take a little bit of time to build up your squirrel army, but once you get it going, it unlocks a lot of really strong effects that we'll see once we go through the deck. Now, this ability, it is mandatory, so you have to summon a squirrel in a space adjacent to Squirrel Girl, but I believe the rulebook states that has to be an empty space. So if you don't have any empty spaces, by you, then I believe you will not summon a squirrel that turn. But we'll have to get clarification on that one, but based on the rulebook, that is how it goes. So let's take a look at the deck here. So an interesting thing that we see right off the bat with Squirrel Girl, some of her cards have flavor text at the bottom, which some of you might enjoy. This one says much improved over the Bite of Plush, because this one is called Bite of Steel. So it's a squirrel only attack, 2 value. It says during combat, if there are 4 or more squirrels in the opposing fighter's zone, the value of this card is 5 instead. So kind of like a momentous shift. And 4 or more squirrels in the opposing fighter's zone shouldn't be too difficult. It'll take a little bit of time, so you can't play it super early in the game, but once you build them up, this should be pretty easy to trigger, as when you maneuver, you get to move all of your squirrels wherever you like, so getting them in the zone shouldn't be too hard. And they can also move through people, so it's not like they can stand on the edge of a zone and try to block your squirrels from getting into that same zone, because you'll just move right in, because you're a small fighter. So pretty cool attack for the squirrels to have. 3 copies, not a bad card at all. Next card is Call of the Mild. So kind of a wordplay on Call of the Wild there. 3 copies of this. It's an any, so the squirrels or Squirrel Girl herself can use this. And it's during combat, if there are 4 or more squirrels in your fighter's zone, the value of this card is 4 instead. After combat, if you won the combat, you get to draw 2 cards. So you can stack up 4 squirrels and you can send them out as a stack, and you can have them attack with this card, which will become a 4. So no matter what, the squirrels are attacking with a 2 value attack. They can either bump to a 5 or a 4 respectively, so pretty decent attack power there. And this one, after combat, if you won the combat, you draw 2 cards, so that's some pretty good card draw, though you do have to win, but winning with a 4 is not that difficult. Especially you could play this on defense, and that actually gives the squirrels some survivability, because a 4 value defense is good. And if you win, you draw 2 cards, which is cool. But the problem is that if you stacked 4 squirrels and you're defending with this, it's a little risky, because if they throw something like a 5 momentous shift or a commanding impact, they're going to kill your whole stack, which feels really bad. So, you know, I don't know. This card, it seems decent. I don't know if it's that good, but it seems pretty decent at least. And then we have Dash. This is a common card we've seen before. Just after combat, move Squirrel Girl up to 3 spaces. 2 copies in the deck, and yeah, it's pretty okay card. Interesting to see 2 copies. It's different than what we've seen before, like with Dracula. Then we see Eat Nuts. So this is the scheme that says Squirrel Girl recovers 2 health. Summon a squirrel in a space adjacent to Squirrel Girl. So this is a pass, and a pass heal 2 is quite good, and you also get to summon a squirrel. So great card overall, and 2 copies in the deck makes your effective health from 13 up to 17, which is pretty solid. Then we have Feint. So interesting that Squirrel Girl only has 2 copies of Feint, much like Bloody Mary or Bullseye. So we're starting to see more and more fighters without the full playset of the feints there. And then we have Fuzzball Special. So after combat, move each squirrel up to 3 spaces. And it's a 3 value attack, 2 copies in the deck. So I feel like this is almost like the regroup of the deck. I don't think it's anything too special, because you can just move all your squirrels up to 2 spaces with a maneuver. And with only a 3 value attack, there's a little bit of opportunity cost that you're losing there, because you could be attacking with something that's actually going to deal damage. But I guess if you are baiting a feint, like this one's pretty decent, because you'll still get a damage over a feint, and the effect isn't too impactful, so you don't care about it too much. I don't know. I'm not super impressed by this card, but it's fine. Next card, we're going to see Get 'em Tippy Toe. Now this is a really good card, because it's a 3 value versatile and says after combat, summon 2 squirrels in any space, and that's any space on the entire board, which is really good to have that option, that versatility. There's 3 copies of this in the deck, and this is what you want to see in the early game, so that you can really get your squirrel army built up quickly and actually become a threat, because before your squirrels are on the board, you're really not dealing much of any damage, so your opponent can just kind of do whatever they please and not have to worry. So this card gets all your other cards online much quicker, so I think this is one of the best cards in the deck. 3 copies too, you love to see it. Next card, Horde of Squirrels. So choose a space with 4 or more squirrels adjacent to it, and you deal 2 damage to a fighter in that space. 2 copies of this. This is an amazing card. So yet again, it's a pass, but it's 2 auto damage as well. And you don't have to stack all the 4 squirrels in the same space to trigger this. You could have a space surrounded with 1 squirrel in each of the connecting spaces adjacent. So I think this one is really good. Can never complain about passes and auto damage. So 2 more great schemes in the deck we see. And then Kick Butts. This is really the big payoff here. It's a 1 value attack. During combat, increase the value of this card by +1 for each squirrel adjacent to the opposing fighter. So with 8 squirrels potentially on the board, this could get up to a 9 value attack, and there's 3 copies of this in the deck, which is just insane. Now it's very telegraphed because when you have all those squirrels bunched up adjacent to your opponent, the opponent's like, well, I need to feint now, because if not, I'm going to be taking a lot of damage, because 9 value attacks are ridiculous, as we've seen with Houdini from the big reveal, or Dracula with a beast form, right? Not many fighters can get up to a 9, so this card is just ridiculous. Your opponent needs to feint it, or they need to keep those squirrels in check. So I think what you might want to be doing is kind of baiting this card a lot, like not baiting this, but making your opponent think that it's going to be this card so that they use their feint, and then you hit them with something like that Fuzzball special, like I said, right? And then what you can do is, if they feint it, cool, they took a damage against kind of a junky card. And if they don't feint it, well, I mean, that kind of sucks for you because you could have thrown this, but at least then you get to spread your squirrels out so that they don't all get attacked on your opponent's next turn and killed off at once, since you probably have to stack some squirrels to trigger this reliably for the 9. So I don't know, this card is super strong, and definitely the card that, if anything, will make Squirrel Girl viable. Then we have Network of Spies. This is a 1 of, another really cool 1 copy scheme. So look at an opponent's hand and choose 1 card for them to discard. Already really strong, right? That's Eliminate the Impossible from Sherlock, or an Insight from Giles. And then, if one of their fighters is adjacent to 4 or more squirrels, choose 2 cards instead. So that's kind of like the Sight from Spike's deck. But this could actually trigger pretty reliably, because you are able to maneuver first and move your squirrels up adjacent to them, and then play this card. So again, this is a pass. So that makes 5 passes total in Squirrel Girl's deck, which is very good when you're looking at a fatigue-oriented gameplay, or a long game value game. And this is just amazing, right? Getting to look at your opponent's hand and pick the best card and rip it out is so good. Like if you started adjacent to them with a bunch of squirrels for whatever reason, like you're ready to play Kick Butts, you can play this first, rip their feint out, and then attack them for a 9, which is just crazy. Obviously, the opponent is going to have to play around that, and that scenario really shouldn't be happening against a smart opponent, but you never know. And getting to rip out 2 cards of the opponent's hand is just incredibly good. It's like Genie's 3 wishes, but you get to pick the cards, which makes it infinitely better. Next card we're going to see is Squirgility. So 3 copies of this. After combat, move Squirrel Girl up to 3 spaces. She may move through sidekicks, and do not count movement for spaces containing sidekicks. So you can kind of make like a chain of squirrels and essentially use this to hop all the way across the board. Now, I don't know when you would really want to do that, because when you're defending, it's probably the end of your opponent's turn, unless they're going for a combo. And then once it comes to your turn, you're going to want to make a counter attack, right? So I don't know how often you're going to really jump across the board with this, but it's cool because it says you can move through sidekicks, which counts the opposing fighter sidekicks. So they can't really pin Squirrel Girl, because she can just defend with this and move through the sidekick and get out of the pin. And that's a really good thing for her that she's got going. And it being a 2 value boost is pretty decent, because I think this is one of those cards that you don't mind boosting with, because you might only need like 1 copy of it in a game to escape a pin, but otherwise it's not the most useful card. So having a 2 boost value, you love to see it, because she only has 1s and 2s on all of her cards, and so having this card be one of the higher boosts, it's pretty good. Next card we see is Squirmish. So it's kind of like Skirmish, but it's called Squirmish. 2 copies, and it says after combat, summon a squirrel in Squirrel Girl's space. Then you place Squirrel Girl in any space in her zone. So it's kind of like a Sly Monkey, right? It's essentially a Sly Monkey, but it's a 4 value versatile instead of a 2, which makes it much, much better. So you can attack if you think they're going to faint and you really want to try and punish them hard, you attack with this and you deal 2 over a feint. And if they don't faint, well, at least you get to summon a squirrel and you get to hop away to safety so that they can't make an immediate counterattack on you. They would have to hit the squirrel, or they'd have to maneuver up to you first, and then it's, you know, going to be back to you, so you have an option to counterattack them yet again if you like. So Squirmish is definitely one of the best cards in the deck. It's just a solid card in a lot of scenarios. And this might be one of the best cards in the deck as well, if not the best. It's called Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, and immediately, if there are 4 or more squirrels adjacent to the opposing fighter, cancel all effects on your opponent's card and ignore its value. So this is a 4-value versatile highway robbery, which is just ridiculous, right? Even if they feint this card, they're still taking 2 damage, and if they don't feint, they're taking 4, like no matter what they played, pretty much. That's just ridiculous. And you can play this as a full negation on defense as well. If you're in a matchup like Dracula or Houdini, where you know the beast form's coming, or that big reveal, and you absolutely need to stop it, well, you can full negate it. Or if you're against Bigfoot and you know a log is coming up and you're at 2 health, normally log is guaranteed lethal over anybody, you know, if they're at 2 health, but this card can save you because it'll ignore that value completely. And it's good against things like Ox Form, you know, against Wukong. So it just, so many uses for this card. One of the best cards in the game for sure. The trick is whether or not you're going to be able to trigger it when you need to, because there needs to be 4 or more squirrels adjacent to the opposing fighter when you do this. So, I don't know. There's 2 copies of this in the deck. It gives a lot of damage output potential, being potentially 8 damage between these 2 cards. Plus you have your 4 auto damage, which would make 12. And then you have a bunch of potential 9s, and then some 5s from the squirrels and whatnot. So there's a lot of damage potential in this deck, and the question remains to be seen of whether or not she can play the value game, right? The long fatigue game, because she only has 1s and 2s on all of her cards for boost values. And being a move 2 melee, that can be so detrimental because you might just get kited around the whole game, or they might just run from you and fatigue you out because you're literally not able to reach them for an attack. Now it's a little different because the squirrels do have 6 cards that they can attack with, and that might help you out in the long game if you're trying to play towards fatigue. So that could be the difference maker along with her 5 passes, but we're going to have to wait and see. I'm hoping that that is enough and that she doesn't just get ran away from, because then that would be the same problem Spike has. And that's why Spike is bad, pretty much, because he can't get any of his stuff to trigger. But that's, you know, we've all talked about Spike enough. So Squirrel Girl overall, I think, has a lot of potential. Her card effects are very strong if you can get them to trigger at the right times. It's just whether or not you're going to be able to build up squirrels quick enough and keep them on the board long enough to trigger their effects, and whether or not her low boost values and being a move to melee is going to be enough of a hindrance to her without map advantage. So I'm interested to find out. Can't wait to do some more testing, but let's move on to the next. Alright, so last but not least, we have Cloak and Dagger. Now this is the fighter that I was most excited for the new set, and I just think it's really cool. That dual hero concept to me is awesome, and I'd love to see it explored more with other fighters, because the Raptors, they're like decent, right? But they're just too volatile for me. They can't really play different styles of gameplay. They always pretty much just have to go aggressive and hope that that is enough for them to close out the game. But I'm hoping to see other play styles possible with dual hero or multi-heroes, because I just think that's a really cool and unique mechanic, and it's very underexplored in Unmatched. But Cloak and Dagger, my most anticipated. Take a look at the sweet card back there. Again, it's much darker and more serious than the other fighters we've seen so far, which are more comic book and fun, colorful, you know, playful style. But Cloak and Dagger, they are both move 2 melee, and they have a starting health of 8 each. So collectively that's 16 health, which for a standard fighter, I mean, that's pretty good. But Raptors have 21 collectively, whereas these guys only have 16, so quite a bit less than Raptors. But their special ability is called Umbra and Refraction. So with Umbra, after you attack, if Cloak dealt at least 2 combat damage, your opponent discards 1 card. With Refraction, after you attack, if Dagger dealt at least 2 combat damage, gain 1 action. So both of the abilities are very similar, which I love, yet they're still unique to which hero triggered the ability, because Cloak is all about value, so he deals 2 or more damage. He makes your opponent discard a card, which is incredibly good value for the long game. But Dagger gets to gain the action, so that's not actually giving you card value. You could maneuver with that action and get more movement and get more hand advantage yourself, but it's not actually changing the overall deck outputs in terms of value, because you drawing a card is just getting you to your deck quicker, but discarding a card from your opponent's hand is actually them losing value out of their deck. So they're both really, really unique, and Daggers is quite the threat offensively, because if she can catch you without defenses, then she can just throw out all of her attacks in hand undefended and deal damage after damage after damage, and essentially just kill you, right? Or deal massive damage that you can't come back from. So you definitely don't want to find yourself caught without defenses against these guys, because it can be very deadly. And Cloak is going to be the one who whittles your opponent's hand down so that he can open up a window for Dagger to go ahead and combo. So it's going to be really cool to see how this deck plays out, and I can't wait to test it more. This is the only one I've actually played myself so far, because over the weekend at the Gamers Ranch, I played this deck 2 or 3 times. The other decks I talked about a lot and discussed, and I watched Chad and Baked Goods and some other people play some games with them. But this is the only one I played myself. But I had a ton of fun playing it, and I can't wait to test it out more. But let's get into the deck. So, first card, Channel the Dark. It's an any. And it says, after combat, if Cloak played this card, place the opposing fighter adjacent to Dagger and gain an action. 3 copies of this card is very good because it lets Cloak have action gain attacks. Now, an interesting thing you'll see throughout this deck is that most cards can be played by either hero, but they have differing effects or more beneficial effects based on who played it, which is really cool, because then it makes it so that most of your deck is still live even once one of the fighters dies, because otherwise it would be terrible, right? You run into the Jekyll and Hyde issue where too many cards that you can only play as a certain form, and that's really limiting. But it's nice to see a lot of any's in this deck that have different effects based on who played it. So this card is potentially really good. If it goes undefended, then your opponent takes 2 damage, has to discard a card, and you get to throw them over to Dagger and you gain an action. And then you're able to combo off with Dagger most likely, because if they took this undefended, they probably don't have defense. So it's a bit weak in terms of its value, but the card effect is very good. 3 copies in the deck is pretty good too. Then we're going to see Chosen Fate. So it's a scheme, deal up to 4 damage to one of your fighters. Your other fighter recovers that amount of health, and you draw 2 cards. So this is used to kind of share the HP pool between your 2 heroes, because if one gets really low and the other is still full health, you can play this to, let's say it's at 1 and 8, right? You can bring the 1, you can deal 4 damage to the 8, bringing it down to 4, which will heal the other one up to 5. So then you're, instead of 1 and 8, you're at 4 and 5, which is much better when it comes to survivability. And you want both of them to survive pretty much the whole game if you're going to be winning. It's very difficult to win if one of your 2 heroes dies, at least early on. If they die in the late game, maybe you can still close it out, but if they die early, you're going to have a really rough time. So this is a great card to help you out with that, and it also gives you some card draw, so pretty nice overall. This is probably the best card in the deck. I mean, it's Commanding Impact like we know and love. It's 3 copies though. It's got a 2 boost value. After combat, draw 1 card. So this is way better than most Commanding Impacts, because you're drawing a card and you're probably dealing 2 or more damage. Unless they played a 4 value defense, this card is going to trigger your ability, and so if Cloak played it, you're going to draw, they're going to discard, and if Dagger played it, you're going to draw and you're going to gain an action, which just makes this one of the most ridiculous attacks in the game, right? The best thing your opponent can do, again, is just play a 4 value defense against this. But if you bait it out, you know, like with this Channel the Dark, they play a 4 value defense into this, then you just pop them over to Dagger and you gain an action, and they wasted their 4 value defense. Now you have Dagger smack them with a Commanding Impact and you just combo off, right? So that's crazy potential. That card is just ridiculous in this deck. I love it. Next card is Dark Force Dimension. So this is the Cloak only attack. Both heroes have a single card that you're able to use as only that fighter, and this is Cloaks. Now there's 2 copies of each of those cards in the deck, but it says after combat, place the opposing fighter in any space and your opponent discards a card. So this gets to knock them across the board if you're trying to play defensively. It can knock them into Dagger if you're trying to go aggressive, and it could even set up pin scenarios. If you put Dagger and Cloak with one single space in between them when Cloak's attacking with this, you can pop them into a pin, which could be really deadly in this deck. So at a 4 value attack, that's great, because even if it's fainted, they're still going to discard a card because you have dealt 2 damage in combat. And if they don't faint, well, they're going to have to discard because of this card effect, and then you get to move them. So just a really, really strong attack card. One of the best cards in the deck for sure. And it's a 3 boost value, which is pretty important, as we'll see later on. Next card is going to be Feint, so your standard Feint. There are 3 copies in this one, and I really like how you can see Dagger, and then like Dagger is kind of like backing off here, like the standard Feint art, but you also see Cloak in the background, which I just think is really cool. It's a neat touch. But yeah, having 3 Feints is always good. Then we have Into Darkness. So 3 value versatile. After combat, choose one of the fighters in the combat, move them up to 3 spaces. So this is like a rending shot, but it is versatile. So that's really good. And you can choose either of the fighters. So you can use it as a combo breaker on defense if you're moving yourself, or you can use it to set up pins maybe and move the opponent. You can't move through people with this card, which is a little unfortunate. So it's harder to set up pins, because you'd have to attack with this first action and then maneuver and set up the pin after the attack, instead of being able to maneuver, set up that pin pocket, and then hit with this second action to move them in. So that's a little sad, but overall, it's a fine card. I mean, there's 3 copies, it's a 2 boost value. Pretty solid. And next, we're going to see Into the Void. Now, I am very underwhelmed with this card. It's like a budget second shot. I mean, it says during combat you may boost this attack, right? But it's only a 2, so it's like Muldoon's second shot, except the problem is there's very few boost values that are 3s in this deck, whereas Muldoon has a decent amount that he doesn't mind throwing away. This deck doesn't have a whole lot, and the 3s are the cards you really want to be keeping, like this Dark Force Dimension, so you don't necessarily want to boost with that. So I'm not super impressed with this. If you get it fainted, then it just full cancels. If they take it undefended, cool, you don't have to boost it and you can still get your ability trigger, but I mean, I don't know, it's not going to happen super often. And I get it, because if this was a 3, it probably would be too good, because then as a 3 you could throw a 3 boost and hit it up to a 6, which would trigger your ability even over something like a Skirmish or a Leap Away, which is really strong. And I don't know, maybe it'd be too good. It probably was too good in testing, and that's why it's a 2, but I don't think it's that great. It's not the worst, but whatever. Then we're going to see Light Force Barrage. Now, this is the Dagger specific attack, 2 copies, and it's a 7 value printed with the 3 boost value yet again. So this is the card that you can use to boost that Into the Void up to a 5. And it says this card's effects cannot be cancelled, which is unfortunate, because it says after combat, if you won the combat, your fighter takes damage equal to the amount of damage you dealt. So if you deal 7 damage undefended, you are taking 7 damage yourself, which is a huge recoil when you only have 8 starting health. So you got to be really careful with this card. You also do not want to use this against 1 health sidekicks, because if they take it undefended, even though they only had 1 health to get damaged for, right, they're still taking the 7 damage. It's the same ruling as Robin Hood's disarming shot. So if a 1 health sidekick token goes undefended against this, Dagger is still going to take 7 damage, even though the sidekick token only had 1 health. So do not be using this against sidekicks. I would highly recommend against that, unless it's maybe Huntsman and you really just need to kill him off early. But this card is just really risky to me. I'm not a huge fan of it overall. I think if you can get Dagger down to like 1 or 2 health and you can just hit for big damage with this, it's a great closer, like a last hurrah Hail Mary kind of move by Dagger, which is great. But I just wish that it could be canceled, because then it would be a fantastic feint bait, because the opponent would take 5, you'd gain an action, and you wouldn't take any recoil damage, and maybe that's too punishing, and so I see why they made it how it is. But I don't know. This card, I think it's at least good to use for the 3 boost value. I just haven't had a lot of situations where I actually wanted to throw it as an attack, but there are cases, I know, but I just haven't ran into them yet. Then we have Living Shadow. So during combat, if Dagger played this card, she swaps spaces with Cloak, and Cloak is now the defender, and the value of this card is 4 instead. So 3 copies of this in the deck. If Cloak defends with this, it's only a blank 2, which is very bad. But if Dagger uses it, Cloak swaps in, and it's a 4, which is very good. So I think that incentivizes the opponent to target Cloak first, because I think Cloak is easier to kill, and you want to just get him out of the way and not have to worry about this potential 4 value defense. But of course, you have 2 pretty beefy heroes, and so you could maybe body block and put Dagger up front. So I think it's a very interesting card. And then Perfect Balance. This is a strong card as well. It's a 4 value versatile. During combat, if Cloak and Dagger are both adjacent to the opposing fighter, the value of this card is 6 instead. So this will always pretty much trigger your ability if you're using it as an attack, because if it's fainted, there's your 2 damage, and if it's max value defended, I say max value, it's usually 4 value defense is max in most fighters decks. So in that case, like a skirmish leap away, this is still, the 6 is going to hit over for your 2 damage and trigger your ability. So it's really strong offensively, and it could be strong defensively as well, but harder to trigger on defense because I think your opponent can almost always get to a space that's not adjacent to both of them. Otherwise, they can just, you know, throw a bait attack into this, expecting the 6, and if you waste your 6 into a regroup, you're going to feel pretty bad. So I think it's better on offense for sure and easier to trigger, but a 4 value versatile defense is not bad on its own. Then we're going to see the Living Light. So after combat, if Cloak played this card to defend, Dagger recovers 2 health. If Dagger played it to attack, Cloak recovers 2 health. So that's kind of a lot to digest, but it's really cool to have the option of healing either of your fighters. So if they're targeting Cloak in the early game, then you want to put Dagger up front. And you want to put Dagger up front so that she takes attacks potentially, and you can use the Living Shadow to trigger into a 4 value defense for Cloak. But you also want to put Dagger up front so that you're able to attack with something like this, which if Dagger attacks, then Cloak is going to recover the 2. So you're incentivized to put Dagger up front early game, and they are incentivized to target Cloak early game. But if they're targeting Dagger, well, then you can start body blocking with Cloak. And if Cloak defends with this, because he's body blocking, so they have to get through him first, and so you defend with this for Cloak, and then Dagger will heal the 2 health. So it works out pretty well. I think a 3 value versatile with potential 2 healing is very strong. So it's situational, but I think it shouldn't be too hard to trigger, and I think that makes it quite a strong card. And the last card in the deck is just Traverse the Dark Force. Nothing special here. It's a 2 value versatile. After combat, move each of your fighters up to 2 spaces. I mean, it's a low value. The after combat effect gives a little bit of movement, but not a ton. I don't think this is really that good of a card overall. And with only a 1 boost value, I really wish this was like a 3 boost, because then you could actually have some good option to discard for your Into the Void. But I don't know. I have had this come up in situations before where I think one of my guys attacked, and then based on the map, they used like a dash to get 3 spaces away, but I was able to use that after combat movement to move my other fighter into attack position or something. I don't remember the exact situation, but I have had this be useful before, so it's not a terrible card. It's just situational and kind of mediocre. But overall, that's Cloak and Dagger for you. I had a lot of fun playing them. None of their cards are too insane on paper, but you got to consider their ability triggering when you're talking about this deck, because anytime your opponent takes anything undefended, there are no printed ones, so anything undefended is going to trigger their ability guaranteed. So you always have to be defending against them unless you want them to either gain actions or make you discard cards. So it's almost like Medusa in a sense, except probably less punishing than a Gaze, of course, but still punishing. So you got to defend them constantly, and so that gives them a lot of opportunity to push the tempo. They don't have a ton of card draw is the issue, because their only card draw is from their Chosen Fate, and that's just a draw 2, which is nothing crazy. And they have a draw one with commanding, I guess. That is pretty good card draw as well. But it's more so the fact that you get to whittle your opponent's hand down because you're forcing them to defend everything, and then you're also getting potential extra value off of the ability. And so you whittle the hand down, and then you just get in some undefended attacks, and they're pretty threatening. But their values are a little low, so triggering their ability when the opponent is defending is not the easiest thing to do. But it's a fun puzzle. I'm interested to see how far they can go in terms of being competitively viable. I'm not sure if they can do it or not yet, but I'm going to be testing them out for sure, and I am going to find out because they are a ton of fun, so it'll be a great time.
All right, and that's going to do it for the box opening today. And again, that's Marvel Teen Spirit. So it's up for sale on the Restoration Games site. Make sure you click the link in the description below and order your copy because these fighters are just a blast to play. And speaking from experience, Cloak and Dagger, so much fun, and I'm sure the others are very fun as well, and I can't wait to get some games in with those. Which, speaking of, I am going to be streaming Marvel Teen Spirit on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/ZeroSkater12. I have everything uploaded on there, so I'm going to be getting some streams in showcasing the new fighters, and I would love it if you all would join in. So make sure to follow me on Twitch, and you can join all the action live when I do that, which will be coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, that's going to do it. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and let me know down in the comments which one are you most excited for and why, because I think they all are very unique, and they're going to play unlike anything we've seen so far in the game, as do pretty much all the new releases in Unmatched, right? And new sets are always so exciting. There's so much hype and so many questions about, you know, how is this character going to do into this other character, or how is this one going to fit into the meta, or all this stuff. And it's just so exciting and so much fun. So one of the best times of the year always when we have new sets releasing. So I'm very happy to have gotten this early release copy. So thanks to Restoration Games for providing me with this. And I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already, so that you can keep up to date on all of my awesome Unmatched content. And I should have more Matchup of the Month coming up pretty soon as well. So those are always a fun time. So be sure you subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you can hear about my new videos when they drop. But thank you all for watching. I'm ZeroSkater12, and I'll see you next time.